There's so much news percolating the NHL world that we're not stopped covering it. On the latest episode of the Locked On Fantasy Hockey Podcast, the UFAs have been flying off the shelves, but there's still a couple with fantasy value. We're breaking it all down on today's show. Let's get this paper.
You're Locked On Fantasy Hockey, your daily podcast on fantasy hockey.
Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
You heard the music and you know what time it is. It's time for your daily source for fantasy hockey news, betting breakdowns, and all of the latest out of the NHL, the Locked On Fantasy Hockey Podcast with Steal and Flip. I got to show that love to the everydayers. Shout out to everyone out there making us your first listen every single day, even throughout the summer. We're a little bit all over the place, schedules and timing, but we will be here every single day throughout the summer, breaking down what you need to know out of the hockey world. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Steele, we're going to talk about some of the top UFAs still available. There's some intriguing names out there. They might not exactly be draftable players, but something tells me they're going to be players that we're going to be looking at in and out of the fantasy hockey season. And maybe, depending on how deep your keeper league is, you might be actually taking a look at these guys as back end of the draft flyers. We got to talk about Tarasenko, a little bit of a signing from the Detroit Red Wings, who you and I have been critical of. I'm curious to see what you think about this signing. Anton, Lundell, Bill Zito, the Florida Panthers. You and I haven't spoken about them and their fantasy value, but honestly, Steele, first and foremost, this is a fantasy hockey show. We don't get a lot of opportunities to shine a light on some of the angles in hockey that perhaps deserve a lot more. The NHL hasn't done a good job at all about being an inclusive, diverse, or open league, and things have been long overdue for a change. I'm speaking for myself on this. I'll let you echo your own sentiments, but I think you feel very similar in that today we deserve to give some credit where credit is due for some trailblazers in the game of hockey today. And I'm taking a look at Jessica Campbell, making massive history with the Seattle Kraken, becoming the first woman as an assistant coach behind an NHL bench. Long overdue, my friend. There isn't a ton of fantasy takeaway here. I let you have your own say on this situation. However, I dug into it anyway, and Dan Bilesma and Jessica Campbell worked in harness, in unison for the Coachella Philly Firebirds, and they had a couple of players in Ty Cartier, Shane Wright, and Riker Evans, who are all in line to make major noise this year with some new coaches in line in Seattle. Credit due to the first woman ever behind the bench, long overdue, but still, I'm looking into some of these names in the fantasy realm as well with these new coaches in play. I got my eyes peeled on the Seattle Kraken. Chandler Stevenson, Brandon Montour. You and I are going to break down every single team in the NHL over the next couple of weeks, but you and I both wanted to come on here today and show massive credit, stick taps, whatever you want to say, to the Kraken franchise and, of course, to Jessica Campbell herself.
Yeah, congratulations to Jessica Campbell. Congratulations to women worldwide. This is a historic feat right now. And like you said, long overdue. Jessica Campbell has the experience and the credentials and the resume to be in the NHL. We're starting to see a lot more diversity, inclusion. Like you said, there's still a long way to go for the NHL to be what it needs to be at its best. But this is long overdue for women. Women's rights and women's history, and Jessica Campbell being the first full-time assistant head coach in the NHL was long overdue. She's decorated throughout the Canadian Women's Hockey League, the Canadians national team, the NCAA. She has the resume. She's been a skills coach. She's been a development coach in Europe as well. Like you said, she has time with Dan Bilesma with the Coachella Valley Firebirds under him as an assistant head coach. So this was long overdue. And, this is not just hockey. It's also, we saw Becky Hammon in the NBA as the first female assistant coach as well, until she decided to join the WNBA and become the head coach of the Las Vegas Aces. So
probably a smart move.
Smart move, but we've seen it happen. There's a lot of men that are head coaches in the PWHL. There's a lot of women and head coaches in the PWHL. So it's about time that we've seen an assistant head coach. And I'm very looking forward to seeing the first ever head coach in the National Hockey League for women as well. Don't know how long that's going to take. It should be a lot sooner than later from what we're seeing right now, but long overdue. Congratulations again to Jessica Campbell. Congratulations to, everybody out there who's been rooting for her and her, her coaching experience. Like I said, the resume speaks for itself. She has the hockey skill. She played NCAA. She played in the Canadian Women's Hockey League, the world stage as well for Canada.
Yeah, she did.
Long overdue. Excited to see what Seattle brings and what she brings to the table with the new head coach and the new assistant coach being brought in. Like you said, Ty Cartier, Shane Wright being brought up hopefully this season.
Yeah.
A lot of young prospects, Brandon Montour being signed long-term there. It's going to be very intriguing to see what happens with the Seattle Kraken team and a lot of their fantasy value.
Well, and specifically this Riker Evans kid in, 71 games as a D-man the year before in Coachella under the watchful eye of Bilesma and Campbell. He put up 44 points, Steele, in 71 games. So there is going to be a definite fantasy angle to be taken here because the Seattle Kraken are a little bit in flux, and I'm going to be having a very close eye on this situation, especially given, and I know Chandler Stevenson doesn't jump off the page. Brandon Montour, maybe the term was a bit too much for a guy really coming off of 2 good seasons. They are an improved team, it seems. And now they're bringing in all of this good energy. We're not trying to get too far ahead of ourselves here, but we are going to give credit where credit is due. And the game of hockey is long overdue for this influx of diversity and smart hockey minds, and that's what we have in Jessica Campbell. So hats off to her and the entire Kraken organization. Steele, let's keep today short and sweet because right after the break, Lundell, Tarasenko, a Bill Zito tie-in, but both players have varying fantasy relevancy, and we're going to talk about that along with, I got 3 top remaining UFAs with fantasy upside that I want to pick your brain about. We'll keep that short and sweet as well. Today's episode is brought to you by our friends at Game Time. You never want a stressful ticket buying experience when you're going to your favorite event, especially the MLB, which is why Steele and I love the Game Time app for all of our Blue Jays tickets. Whenever you're going down to the ballpark, you're opening up the Game Time app. Take the guesswork out of buying MLB tickets with Game Time. Download the app today, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off. Steele nailed the spelling on that one. Download the app today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed.
And thank you so much for making the Locked On Fantasy Hockey Podcast your first listen every single day. Continue to hit the subscribe button, the follow button, leave a 5-star review. We appreciate all that love and support you show us Monday through Friday. Make sure you go subscribe to the Locked On Sports Days YouTube channel as well. Program for you every day to bring you the biggest stories and top stories of the day. Locked On Sports Day brings you can't miss analysis, news, and opinions. You can also find it on the free Amazon Fire TV channel app, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every single day. And the National Hockey League's team right now, the Stanley Cup champions, they signed another deal. Anton Lundell also gets paid. What was the contract again? Just so I'm 6 years, $5 million AAV.
It's 6 years. The AAV is escaping me right now because Steele, the financial terms are still not confirmed. So I believe there are some numbers out there in and around that ballpark, but let's just go with it's a 6-year deal and the financial terms are yet to be disclosed, which is the official statement on it so far.
I believe it was 6 years, $5 million. I'm pulling up Cap Friendly right now. Anton Lundell.
I've got the NHL.com report up, and it says, unless it's a typo, financial terms were not released. So anyway.
Cap Friendly, and Lundell, 6 years, $5 million AAV. So he's
by the way, let's thank our lucky stars. Cap Friendly is still out there because it's not for long. So anyway, shout out to Cap Friendly.
Hopefully that doesn't leave us, but. 6 million, 5-year AAV, $30 million deal total for Anton Lundell. Mm-hmm. For me personally, it's not egregious. This deal for Anton Lundell. I mean, It is a little much in my opinion. He's still 22 years old. He'll be 23 in October. 44 points in his rookie season, back-to-back seasons of under 30 to 35 points. There's still a lot for this player to develop offensively. I think, there's obviously, we all see the potential of what he brings to the game. He's a pretty decent two-way forward as well for the Florida Panthers.
Sure.
Again, he only played 15 and a half minutes of average ice time last season. So it's not egregious, the deal that I'm seeing, but I think it was definitely a overpayment for what I'm seeing. It just seems like a lot of players right now are getting handed money that they don't really deserve, in my opinion. But Anton Lundell, fantasy-wise, when you look at what he brings to the table for the Florida Panthers and what he did for them in the playoffs, I understand the deal. I get it. He's a great third-line centerman. He plays that position well. He makes his teammates and his line mates a lot better as well for such a young player in the league right now. Fantasy-wise, there's still much to desire for his game. The shots are great. 166 shots, 40 blocks, 61 hits, 46 penalty minutes. There's still a lot to desire offensively. Again, back-to-back seasons of 33 and 35 points. But I like overall, the deal is decent. It's okay, in my opinion. Again, maybe a little bit on the higher side of what I was expecting for this player. But fantasy value-wise, like, where would you put Anton Lundell? Is he a draftable player? Is he somewhere from 14 to 16 right now?
So I think right now, to say he's a draftable player, not to cop out, I'm going to, in most leagues, say he's not yet. Yeah. However, I do think this is a Bill Zito long-term move because Sam Bennett's contract is going to come up after next season. There are some juggling. We still don't know how much he's going to give to Carter Verhaeghe. So I think this is one of those long moves that Anton Lundell isn't going to be the third line center. He is going to be relied upon as playing more minutes, and that is how much Bill Zito trusts in this player. Steele, this is a 12th overall draft pick. He is signing into Anton Lundell long-term. That's how I'm looking at this. Does it happen this year? I'm not sure. What is the output of him in terms of points? I'm not exactly saying if they give him more responsibility that the fantasy value just automatically explodes. It makes sense that it goes up. And I really do think that's how Bill Zito is looking at this. Next season, I don't know, because you still have Sam Bennett in the mix and he is going to have to fight for minutes. However, with some of the contracts still up in the air and Sam Bennett's running out after the end of next season and how good Sam Bennett has been, I think Bill Zito is a very smart man, and I think you are as well, Steele. The dollars aren't going to add up in Florida when you also have cup winners and these agents for these players who have performed well in the playoffs and in the regular season also go, hey, Billy boy, our resume here says we have a ring. You're going to have to pay up. We know Bill Zito is ahead of the game. This man is a hockey menace, and I think that is what you're seeing.
It's all in the eyes. It's all in the eyes.
You don't want to disappoint Billy Z. So anyway, to spit it all out, long story, really long, Steele, Anton Lundell for me is a sneaky back like last round or two draft option. But for now, I'm looking at this as it's his future as that second line center in Florida.
Yeah, it is. And another Florida Panther that has decided to change his future to a new direction and a new team. Vladimir Tarasenko signs a deal with the Detroit Red Wings for 2 years, $4.5 million AAV, $9 million total. If that math adds up correctly, which I believe it does. You know how we are here with the math equations, but
it adds up to me, brother.
It adds up. Tarasenko signs with the Detroit Red Wings. We were just talking about this. We were talking about that second line in Detroit.
Yes.
And how way worse it is compared to the top line of Dylan Larkin, Alex DeBrincat, and Lucas Raymond. Now they've got JT Compher up the middle, who's a very capable second line center. They re-signed Patrick Kane to a $4 million deal. They now get Vladimir Tarasenko, and this, honestly, I am very much impressed with what this deal means for Detroit as well. Overall, the money and contract, again, the overall contract for Vladimir Tarasenko, and I'm very intrigued for what it means for Vladimir Tarasenko's fantasy value-wise. I mean, he gets to play with Patrick Kane, who still has so much upside to his game. I know he's, last year, coming off the hip surgery, there's a lot
he
of
looked
question
great.
marks about. He looked great after the hip surgery. He looked great when he was playing with the Detroit. Obviously, it didn't work out for them in making the playoffs, but
they made a push though.
They made a push. This is a pretty good deal, in my opinion. And, the only thing that worries me about Vladimir Tarasenko's fantasy value is his deployment on special teams. I think the first power play unit is clearly going to be Alex DeBrincat, Lucas Raymond, Patrick Kane, Dylan Larkin. And then, they're either going to be using Moritz Seider or Eric Gustafsson now, who they just acquired too. So it's going to be interesting to see Vladimir Tarasenko's deployment on the power play. He's going to be getting second power play unit time, obviously. But other than that, he gets to play with JT Compher and Patrick Kane, who are, in my opinion, pretty good studs to play with. Maybe not fantasy wise for JT Compher, but otherwise, this is still a player that just, 3 years ago had an 82-point season. In the last 3 years, he had a 50-point season. He had a 55-point season. So very much capable in the offensive zone. I know he's on the older side of the ball here, but for me, I like Vladimir Tarasenko's fantasy value. Again, somewhere in the mid to later stages of what we're seeing right now, but that's just how I'm feeling about Tarasenko. I'm hot on Tarasenko all the time.
I think this is a very difficult situation to assess at this point of the offseason because Vladimir Tarasenko has proven his individual worth. And as much as he's bounced around now a little bit, and in Ottawa, not a great scenario, into Florida for 19 games, puts up 14 points. I think what's very clear is, considering where he is at in his career, is what does he do in terms of fitting in with what he has around him. So when we look at these early projected lines, and obviously it makes sense that he's playing on the quote unquote second line with right now Compher and Patrick Kane. To me, it just really doesn't matter. Do they rotate him around? Where does he go? Maybe he bounces down. I don't care to the third line.
If he's not playing great, you put him in the bottom six. But we just talked about this. Like, you're not playing with Michael Rasmussen or Tyler Mott on your second line left wing position when you've got Tarasenko. So
most likely not. Yeah. I just mean at this point, they need to get the most out of him, and it'll probably mean playing with the elite pieces on this team. Not exactly a hot take. However, Vladimir Tarasenko, for me, going into this season, now he has a cup in tow, maybe a little chemistry with another wily veteran in Patrick Kane. These are some of those angles, Steele, that you and I are going to have to probably dig into at a little bit more length, because as much as the Alex DeBrincat Patrick Kane connection is an obvious one, what's not to say a couple of wily vets link up on that secondary or perhaps number one power play in Detroit and absolutely go off. Why don't we go off on a couple of the remaining top UFA names? Man, you and I have been on point with these segues. I've got two names that I'm looking at, including a former Detroit Red Wing, that I think have some sneaky good fantasy value. I'm intrigued to hear what you have to say. Why don't you take us there, brother?
Yeah, a lot to talk about after the break. A lot of remaining top UFAs after Tarasenko is now gone and Anton Lundell signs that contract. We'll get to all of these projections after the break. It's coming up right now. Thank you so much for making the Locked On Fantasy Hockey Podcast your first listen every single day. Continue to hit the subscribe button, the follow button, leave a 5-star review. Flip, and I appreciate all that love and support you show us Monday through Friday, showing us that love on the podcast platforms. Thank you so much for tuning in to our episodes throughout the offseason right now. We really do appreciate it. And what we also appreciate are some of the top remaining UFAs right now in the National Hockey League. We're going to talk about a few remaining UFAs who we believe have some fantasy value and could be a very good target for some teams out there looking to bolster up their blue line or their offensive group. Flip, over to you, my friend.
Yes, sir.
Who are you looking at? Which names intrigue you the most?
After looking at the list of D-men and goaltenders, obviously not a whole ton to get shiny about on the fantasy hockey angle of things. There will be some teams, some GMs out there that find a fit for the names such as Tony DeAngelo, Tyson Barrie, Kalen Addison. Otherwise, they will fit in somewhere. Will they have fantasy relevancy? Perhaps not. But when I look at these two names on the forward angle, Steele, Daniel Sprong is number one. 43 points in 76 games last year. It doesn't jump off the page, but peripherally, and I really do think with his skill set, Daniel Sprong is a player that at points next season will be fantasy relevant. He's coming off a season of 66 games and 46 points for the Kraken. Last year, a little bit underutilized perhaps by the Detroit Red Wings, only 12 minutes in ice time. I know that's really where he's hovered around for his whole career, but for me, Daniel Sprong at 26 years old, 160 shots, steal, 43 points. I think the offensive upside is there, and if he lands in the right spot and perhaps gets some power play 2 time on a good team, Daniel Sprong, when I looked at the list of names, I'm not saying go out there and draft him, but if he lands on a team with some offensive output, I might be looking at him as a very good week 1 fill in or that week to week flyer for offensive bump if he does land on a good team.
Look, this is a guy who's been in the bottom 6 for almost his entire career. And like you said, on average, he's only getting 11 to 12 minutes of average ice time throughout his career as well. But when he's getting only 12 minutes, 11 and a half, 12 minutes of average ice time, and he's putting up 40 plus points, how is no one watching this right now? Someone needs to take advantage of what Daniel Sprong brings to the game. Right wing, only the right wing eligibility. Like you said, 27 years old, but I mean, even if he can get up to 14, 15 minutes potentially this next season, what is that going to mean for his peripheral stats? What is that going to mean for his offensive game? What does it mean if he can crack into a top power play unit or a second power play unit as well? Hopefully a top power play unit. But I love the fact that you're bringing up Daniel Sprong because there's a lot to love about his game, even though he doesn't play that much ice time or get that much ice time in the National Hockey League throughout his career. So Daniel Sprong is definitely an interesting player. Besides, again, these are back-to-back good seasons for him. The years prior, he was a perennial 20-point player. This was definitely the year with the Seattle Kraken was above expectation, but now he did it in back-to-back seasons with a different team. So if he can continue to get more minutes, if he can continue to get more opportunity, that means a lot for his fantasy value because he's also, again, as of right now, he's a great pickup. He's a great flyer, from time to time when you need to fill a position, you need to fill an injury, fill in for an injured player that is on your roster. That's a great player to bring up right now. I hope he signs with a great team moving forward for next season. You know how I feel about this player. I think Max Pacioretty still remaining is on the top of my list of unrestricted free agents right now. I understand he's on the higher age side of he's going to be 36 years old. In November, he's coming off some very, very, very serious injuries with back-to-back torn Achilles, with different Hurricanes and the Washington Capitals. It's a scary situation for Max Pacioretty. I know why probably a lot of teams are hesitant right now, but he's had the time to rehab. He's had the time to get fully healthy. It's a scary injury because you never know what's going to happen if it can happen again, which it already has happened again to him. But in my opinion, Max Pacioretty should be on the top of this list, right above Daniel Sprong, in my opinion. Daniel Sprong will probably be number 2 for forwards, but I think Max Pacioretty still has a ton of fantasy value throughout the game. He played 47 games last year. 23 points on a very poor offensive Washington Capitals team, but still had 76 hits, 22 blocks, 95 shots. The peripheral stats speak for themselves with Max Pacioretty. So for me, he is still one of the top remaining unrestricted free agents forward-wise in the National Hockey League right now.
I appreciate that you've also stuck to your guns. Shout out to everyone if the Wi-Fi is going a little in and out. We on road, but Max Pacioretty, the obvious injury concerns aside, he has proven that he can bring it. That will be one of those players that, depending on where he goes week to week at the top of the season, I'll be having my eyes peeled. This name steal might not make a whole lot of sense unless you've been paying attention. Shout out to the vape god Troy. In 23 games for the Columbus Blue Jackets, Alex Nylander went off at the end of last season. 11 goals, 15 points in 23 games, 62 shots on net. And I really don't know what next season holds in terms of where he lands. But for me, considering how good he was at the end of last season, I'm intrigued because that offensive upside that he showed in 23 games, maybe he would be the perfect fit to go back to Columbus. I don't know what happens, but when I was looking at that list deal, it can get a little sketchy along with our Wi-Fi right now. Alex Nylander was one that I was very intrigued by, a 17% shooting percentage. I know that's a little bit of an irrelevant stat. However, the 15 points in 23 games for the Blue Jackets, that was relevant. And I hope the rest of this week's episodes will be the same. We'll be breaking down all the NHL news that you need.
All the NHL news. And yeah, sorry, what was the player you were just talking about?
Alex Nylander. And I know the Wi-Fi sketch.
The Wi-Fi it is sketch, but it pops in and out. But Alex Nylander, that week of when he popped off with like multiple hat tricks, and I swear that was a Freaky Friday situation, because at the same time, William Nylander started to go cold for the Toronto Maple Leafs. So a little bit of a Freaky Friday situation going on there with the Nylander brothers. One last player, you mentioned him to me off air. Calen Addison is also a very intriguing, interesting player to me, because when you look at what he did with the Lethbridge Hurricanes, 3 great seasons with them, 65 plus points, with the Iowa Wild as well, 22 points in 31 games in the AHL, 34 points in 43 games. I think he's been a little bit not mistreated, but mishandled throughout the NHL career stage right now. Again, very young player, 24 years old. When he was playing with the San Jose Sharks the last year, it was the San Jose Sharks, one of the worst teams. He was a minus 35, only 12 points. He was getting 17 and a half minutes of average ice time. The peripheral stats could be a lot better, but it's a very intriguing player to me because he's so young right now. And again, on the smaller side for a defenseman, just pulling up he's 5'11", 173 pounds. He's a small defenseman. He's not big. He gets pushed around a lot in the defensive zone. And that's why he gets, that's why the stats kind of speak for themselves there on how poorly it is. But again, I think offensively there is some potential, but you're not picking up this player. You're not drafting this player. You're not really picking up this player.
It's a deep cut.
But also,
the San Jose Sharks are on the come up, so who knows?
They are on the come up. But yeah, you're not drafting this player. You're not picking him up unless it's like in dire desperation for a defenseman who has, maybe 3 or 4 games in the week. But I just wanted to throw Calen Addison's name out there for an intriguing young defenseman right now.
It was a very intriguing name only a year or so ago. Obviously, things have gone a lot differently for the Wild and now for the San Jose Sharks. Who knows what happens? Those two will be here the rest of the week, breaking it all down for you. And I'm already hyped for the upcoming draft season. Can't come soon enough.
Still so much to cover in the offseason. We're going to be cracking down and digging in deep into all the NHL teams right now. Top 5 fantasy value aspects and players moving forward into next season. Lots to break down for every single team. We'll get to that throughout the month of July. But thank you so much for making the Locked On Fantasy Hockey Podcast your first listen and tuning in for today's episode with Flip and I. Make sure you go check out Locked On Sports Day's YouTube channel, the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. You can also find it on the free Amazon Fire TV channel app, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Again, thank you so much for tuning in for today's episode with Flip and I. Have a great day out there. Good luck with all your bets this summer, and we shall see you back here again tomorrow.